What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. When I was working on the last future changes video from about a week ago actually, I noticed a couple upcoming changes that I have to admit appear particularly amazing for tank champions. Now we all know that tanks are hard to kill and come with tons of crowd control, and that means they're often kind of tiptoeing the line between being balanced and overpowered based on how easy they are to kill. If they can ever put out a good amount of damage relative to other roles, a lot of the times, there's not really much reason to play anything else in the game, and this is why, over the past years in League of Legends history, we've ended up with a lot of tank-heavy metas throughout time. And I have to say that it seems like some of the upcoming future changes are almost certainly once again going to cause this to happen in the near future. So today we're looking at the changes that could cause a tank meta to occur, and what you should keep in mind so that you'll be ready to deal with it. And this video is going to be sponsored and edited by ProGuides.com. ProGuides is a guide website with the intention of helping you become the best player that you can be. They recently released a new and fun way to learn League of Legends. You can choose a course to study and earn points for answering questions with personalized data tracking. And you can also talk to a challenger player to get personalized help or ask questions 24/7 at any time using the website. Try it for free at the link in the description, and let's jump right into the video. Now, there are two key major changes that are going to be the catalyst for this potential big shift towards a tank meta in League of Legends. The first one is that Riot plans to nerf damage systems across the entire game. Riot Meddler has commented before that they've been looking into the statistics of where damage is coming from in League of Legends. For example, some of the damage comes from champion abilities, some of it comes from items, some of it comes from runes, all sorts of things. And they're also looking into how much damage is front-loaded or burst damage, and how much is sustained damage over time. The investigations are intended to give Riot some insight into which damage sources are okay to stack together, which kinds should be more unique, and also which sources are contributing the most damage overall. The current assessment is that there is too much damage in the game, particularly burst damage, and that most of the damage from champion abilities hasn't really changed that much actually. Instead, it's coming from the secondary sources like runes and items, which have been steadily increasing in the amount of damage that they provide. And a lot of that damage is upfront burst damage rather than actual sustained damage over time. In some cases, players can stack multiple items that give front-loaded damage, like maybe on the first auto attack, which ends up providing way too much instant burst damage, which Riot views as being pretty unhealthy. So to fix this, Riot plan on making a lot of changes to damage-focused runes, and they'll probably also be looking at items that are causing similar issues. Along with that, Riot Meddler has mentioned that Riot will be looking at base defensive stats and defensive stats gained through items or runes too. To summarize all this info, we're essentially just going to see nerfs to a lot of the core damage-related runes and items across the board in League of Legends, but probably not too many changes to champion abilities themselves. This is definitely an immediate benefit for tanks, because they tend to build defensively and only have good damage because their base numbers are pretty high. If other roles are not able to build up as much damage through scaling, items, etc., tanks will be able to match their damage output pretty convincingly. At the same time, there will also be less damage that the tanks have to worry about receiving, which again is going to make them harder to kill. Another thing is that Riot are also looking at buffing defensive stat, which again is just going to be even better for tanks once again. Keep in mind what we kind of said at the start of this video. Tank metagames happen because tanks are difficult to kill, they pack a ton of crowd control, and their damage is honestly not that bad. If they can contribute a reasonable amount of damage and be extremely difficult to kill, even if it's less than the peak damage offered by other roles, they're definitely going to still be the best choice in many situations, which causes a tank meta. So if Riot nerf damage across the board with a focus on items and runes, tanks are definitely coming out ahead. Now, it's not the only big shift that could cause this tank meta though. Tanks themselves are also going to be receiving some significant buffs in the future according to Riot Meddler. He mentioned that while looking at anti-tank damage sources such as armor penetration or true damage, the numbers seemed a little bit overtuned, which means that some of those items will likely be reduced in effectiveness, but they'll also be directly buffing any of the previously over-nerfed tanks. This will probably start off as some base stat or perhaps ability buffs to give them a little bit of tankiness back, but Riot also wants to make their kits a little bit more satisfying to play as well. Historically, reworking a kit to make it more fun has always introduced some kind of at least stronger elements to properly reward a player for landing the ability. So we'll definitely see more variants on tank abilities in the future, but that's definitely going to be accompanied with a bigger payoff when you're able to actually land the abilities themselves. So this combination of nerfs to damage and buffs to tanks is, at least in my opinion, extremely likely to cause another tank meta where tank champions are going to be incredibly dominant. With them being so hard to deal with, but still able to deal a pretty decent amount of damage, there's really no role except AD carry where you wouldn't be better off running a tank in these kinds of metas. The good news though is that we've been through quite a few tank metas throughout the years before, so we kind of have a good idea of what usually happens and what you can expect from a tank meta, which means we got some time to prepare for it, plan ahead, at least assuming that Riot don't recognize the risk of this happening and change their plans to stop the tank meta from happening in the first place. Now, the most recognizable immediate meta shift that happens during a tank meta is that hyper carries, specifically hyper carry AD carries, become extremely powerful. At the end of the day, if every role has a tanky champion in it, you want to be able to pick a champion who is good at killing tanks. AD carries with heavy armor penetration, percent health damage, or true damage are all great candidates and typically the best champions at killing tanks directly. Champions like Vayne or Kog'Maw or Jinx can be protected and will eventually be able to burn those health pools down quite quickly, which means in a tank meta you can expect to see those champions' play rates and win rates go up a little bit, even if the items and runes that those champions like to use are nerfed a little bit. Their ability to deal with tanks is mostly due to the specific abilities in their actual champion kits, and those are definitely unlikely to be changed in the upcoming nerfs to be damage. In fact, it's pretty much confirmed. Since hyper carries will become more popular again, any supports with good defensive tools, good ability to peel, will also likely become more popular simply because they're just so good at protecting those crucial hyper carry champions. On top of all that, tanks also tend to be really immobile. That's kind of like the key weakness that tanks typically have. So supports with these peel tools tend to be extremely effective at kiting those tanks and keeping them away from your carries. With hyper carries becoming more popular in the tank meta, there's also a chance we'll see some adjustments to assassins in the meta, particularly attack damage assassins with sustained damage. These champions generally see a rise in play during tank metas so that tanky team compositions have a way to deal with the enemy hyper carry. But at the same time, it's not entirely always the case. It really comes down to which tanks are being played. If the assassins are heavily countered by the enemy tank composition or by the tanks that are popular, especially in lane, they're not really going to become popular choices. Bruisers and fighters, though, are very likely to drop off in pick rate. They tend to just not have enough damage to compensate for the general lack of crowd control and weaker defenses, while also usually having a difficult time in lane versus tank champions. Whenever tanks are popular, fighters and bruisers kind of just become pointless picks. It's possible to pick really snowbally ones like maybe Riven or Renekton and build damage and try to end the game pretty fast, but smart teams will just play super safe, outscale, and eventually become unkillable and unbeatable, so those strategies can become a lot more difficult to pull off and tend to be not as strong during a tank meta. The more flexible, poke-oriented champions and carries also tend to be a little bit weaker in a tank meta. For example, Ezreal is never going to be as strong of an AD carry choice in tank meta compared to someone like Kog'Maw. Ezreal's power comes from his ability to escape, kite, chase down weaker targets, take advantageous fights whenever he wants, so his lower damage oftentimes doesn't really matter in most metas, but as soon as a bunch of tanks enter the mix, versatile toolsets like that tend to become less effective because they just can't contribute enough damage to actually have an impact and kill tanks quickly enough. The tanks might not be able to catch up to Ezreal, and he can definitely kite them really well, but he just won't be able to do his job regardless and is going to get zoned out without being able to kill anyone. You could end up trying to win through split pushing all game, but you're probably going to be better off having a hyper carry for that one too. Now, I think typically throughout time, a lot of players, or at least the general population, tends to not really like tank metas for some somewhat obvious reasons, I would say. The game tends to, at least in the opinion of many players, tends to get a little bit stale and boring when tanks are found in every lane throughout a game. The matchups are pretty slow, they don't really do that much damage, the skill expression tends to be a lot lower, there's less moments for exciting gameplay. Even winning your lane can become pretty pointless because tanky champions can just turtle up and slowly scale to catch up anyway. The silver lining though is that Riot has definitely become better at adapting and adjusting to problems with the meta since the last tank meta. If the tank meta does come to League of Legends in the future, it's actually highly likely that we'll only see it stick around for maybe a month or two, potentially even just a patch or two, because Riot knows how out of control and how sometimes anti-fun tank metas can be, and they know how many players are gonna kind of just stop playing if they're forced to deal with the tank meta again, which means that it's pretty unlikely that they'll leave it to dominate entire seasons like it has done in the past. Either way, that's just going to be it for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video and have a good idea of what to expect in the future. Ideally, Riot will notice the risk of a possible tank meta being created with these changes if they go ahead with them, so maybe they can preemptively adjust and avoid it entirely, but there's no update as to that exactly just yet. Maybe get ready to practice some hyper carries, pick some peel heavy support champions, and get ready to face some tanks. Definitely let us know your comments and thoughts on the upcoming changes or perhaps the future meta in the comments below, or maybe share your own strategies of how you deal with tank champions. Either way, it looks like that's going to be it for this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.